things don't go to plan. The student might not access the lesson in the way the teacher might have hoped. You've got to then differentiate on the spot and find a way for them to access the lesson and support students.
Hello, my name's Jenna. I'm an online primary tutor, and today I'm talking to Sam about how to be a good teaching assistant. If you are a teaching assistant, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining me today, Sam.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, we actually know each other through the tutoring community, but
Mhm.
you used to be a teaching assistant, and you very kindly agreed to chat to me about what
Yeah.
it's like to be a teaching assistant. But obviously, we'll go on to your current role a bit later on.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, that sounds good.
Now, if we go back to before, how did you actually become a teaching assistant? Did you have to do any particular qualifications, or was it another way to become a teaching assistant?
I think sometimes they want you to have NVQs or certain qualifications. I didn't have anything like that. I hadn't got any experience of working with children. But I got a job at the school I used to go to. So I don't know if that helped a little bit. And I had an English degree, so I think they knew I'd got qualifications in something, and they just seemed to like me on the interview day. And I started working in a special needs unit, one to one with a child, and I think they just thought I'd be a good fit for that child. And I did. I worked with him for nearly 2 years, and I'm still in touch with the family now. He's now heading for nearly 30, I think, which makes me feel very old.
Oh, wow. And were
Yeah.
you looking for
Mm,
teaching assistant jobs at the time? Like, were there many
mm.
options available, or
I
did that
think that
just come up?
I'm just trying to think. I think I wrote to all the local schools asking for opportunities to come and observe, to try and get some experience with children, and if they had any TA jobs. I can't remember if I must have maybe applied for a couple. I can't remember. But yeah, I decided I'd been working in retail since uni, and I decided I've got this English degree. I think I'd quite like to use it, and I wanted to go into teaching. That was the plan, to get a couple of years experience being a TA. But then I loved the TA role so much, I stayed in it for 15 years. So
Oh, wow, I really didn't realise. Oh,
yeah,
wow, that's crazy.
yeah.
And then, so because now I think it's a bit harder to get a teaching assistant job, you have to have possibly more experience with children and things like that. But what was the process of, like, was there an application, an interview?
Mm.
Did you have to do an observation or anything like that?
Yeah, I had to apply. Yeah, the whole application process was probably for any job, application, cover letter, and then I got invited to interview. I think there was about 8 of us for 3 jobs, and we had to do an activity with the children. Got observed doing that to see if we got on with the kids in that special needs unit. And then I think there was a written activity from what I remember. And then we had an interview where there was a panel of 3 members of staff, the deputy head and the 2 Senkos, I think. And from experience of working in another school for the last 12 years, the interviews have been quite similar actually. They all seem to have some sort of task,
Yeah.
an observation, and the formal interview.
And did you have any warning about those three set steps for the interview?
We got warned about what we'd have to do. Mm.
And how did you find the interview? Was it quite intense? Was there a lot of questions, or in your opinion, was it not too bad?
It's quite intense having 3 people look at you. And that was the same for my then HLTA job. Years later, it was 3 people. So that's quite intense having a panel. But I think it was okay. The questions were all quite fair.
And what about the day in the life of a teaching assistant? What was that like?
I think that it depends on the type of TA you are and what your school's like. In this one I've been talking about in the special needs unit, we'd come in, the kids would all be coming in before the bell went, and the child I worked with, I used to have to help him take his jacket off, take his bag off, get him settled for the day. He was completely non-verbal, so it was a lot of picture cards and prompts and things to help him. And then they'd have various lessons within that unit, or we'd sometimes go out into the main school to use the music room or the science room. So it depends, I think, if you're in a special needs unit or the main school. Obviously, I've also worked in a mainstream school in English lessons, and that would be a case of I would go hour to hour to different English lessons, or I'd be running my own little groups in a library or another classroom. So it'd be quite varied.
And did you like the small group work?
Yes, that's something that I've always loved, and I think that's why I'm now starting to enjoy that as a private tutor who's trying to do more groups. I've always liked the one-to-one as well. I think that's why I didn't really want to do teaching in the end. I wasn't interested in the full classes. I wanted to focus on the individuals and the little groups.
And were teachers, because in my experience, we used to have to give planning to the TAs and they would
Hmm.
follow the planning. Was that your experience, or did you have to do your own as a
Hmm.
teaching assistant?
I think it depends. I think it's a little bit different in a secondary school. I was fortunate that I worked within one subject, so I did often know what the lessons were going to be. I'd work alongside the teacher. If they wanted me to take a group out to do something, they'd ask me, but I'd probably plan what I'd do with them. So it was having that subject knowledge, I think, that helped. I worked within that department as well as the TA department. Whereas I know a lot of other TAs who worked across different subjects, they'd be really involved with certain subjects. They'd get sent the planning and they'd go in and be really involved. But depending on timetabling, they might have a lesson once a fortnight that
Mm.
they then don't get to know very much about that subject. So they'd maybe go in quite blind and you'd have to support quite, you know, just on the spot a little bit. So it depends on timetabling in the school, I think, of how it works sometimes.
And were there many training opportunities for you as a teaching assistant?
Yeah, lots of things came up. In-house training, we did quite a lot because a lot of it is in more recent years, it's been a funding thing, which just is everywhere, isn't it? But we'd always have opportunities on behaviour management and certain parts of special needs, maybe that we wanted to swat up on, so we get the chance to do that. In my more current role, they did provide the course to become a HLTA. They hired me as a HLTA with the condition that I would then do the course. So I did that through the school. They also contributed to helping me do my master's in creative writing later on. It's something that I wanted to do, and because it was part of my role in helping children with creative writing, that they were quite supportive of that as well. So I think I've been quite lucky, really, in advancing a lot of different areas, really.
That's really good. And you mentioned the
Mm,
HLTA role. So there are kind of different
mm,
levels of being a teaching assistant. You've got it kind of got your first level of being a, in every
yeah.
teaching assistant that could be like you mentioned in the classroom, or it could be for a specific child in the SEN department. So can you explain what a HLTA stands for and what is that role?
So HLT, it just means high level teaching assistant, so a little more responsibility. I think in primary schools they often take full classes, and I think in a lot of schools they do.
Mm,
I only ever really took groups, but often have a subject specific knowledge as well. If in a secondary, we had HLTAs for English, maths, and science at the school I worked at, originally. So it's just having that link to that subject.
what are the salary expectations for the different levels of teaching assistants that you experience?
Mm. Um, as a HLTA, I think I was on about 18 grand a year. I think obviously that again depends on area and schools, whether it's an academy or whatever. I think the thing to watch out for with the salaries is they're often prorated. So
Right.
it sometimes looks more than it is. You need to be careful when you're applying for these jobs because you're getting paid for 39 weeks in a year, not 52. So whether you're not without a wage, so you don't get an August where you're not getting paid, it stretches it out throughout the year,
Mm.
which obviously is good. You're not without a wage in the summer, so you don't have to go and get another job. My TA role quite a lot, but it didn't quite pay enough really.
And that is a big thing with TAs, isn't it? Because they're often asked, like you say, to take on the role of a class teacher, really.
Mm,
Excuse me, when the class teachers don't show up for whatever reason, if they've got a course on or if
mm,
they're off sick, especially now, like you said about funding, it's they'll often just ask the TAs and they'll still be paid at the same wage as what they're paid normally, even though they're
mm,
taking on a much um bigger role, which obviously is a whole other ball game within
mm,
itself. So you do have to, a lot of TAs are stepping away because of the role. So what
mm.
do you think makes a good teaching assistant? What skills and qualities do you think a good teaching assistant should have?
I think you need a lot of patience, a lot of humour, and you need to think on your feet because quite often things don't go to plan. the student might not access the lesson in the way the teacher might have hoped. You've got to then differentiate on the spot and find a way for them to access the lesson and support students,
How
yeah,
do you
just
think you can
quickly.
do that as a teacher assistant? Like, if you don't know how to do that, what advice would you give to someone in that role learning to think, or do you think it's just experience with?
I think it comes with experience because the more you know the child, you'll get to know like, oh, they can't do that. I need to adapt this for them, and you. So I think that's where teaching assistants are like gold dust because they often know the teachers more. Sorry, they know the students more than the teachers sometimes because they might spend all day with them in different subjects, whereas the teacher will see them once a day. So they might really know that student inside out and how they can access something and know their needs and any special requirements and yeah, so I think it does come with experience. But yeah, it's that willing to, yeah, learn what you can about that student, learn how that school works, how the teachers work. The more you can do that at the start of a job, and I think you'll become more experienced quickly and you can then pick up things on the spot a little bit more.
Can you give an example of maybe a student that you've worked with, obviously not naming names, where you know for a fact they haven't got something and how you adapted the learning to suit them individually?
Um, Trying to think. So that I was thinking of the two different jobs because they're very different. Working with the non-verbal child, I suppose. I mean, the teachers did get his level of need, but I would often have to differentiate still. The teacher might be doing a lesson on science that was, I think there was one about the five senses once. We were learning about that, but even that was to that, a student who has no verbal capacity or understanding in that way. It came down where we differentiated at the point where I got him to taste some foods. So the idea of tasting and smelling, and so we differentiated it in that way. Well, that's obviously like, really low down differentiation, just so he could be involved in that same lesson. He was experiencing foods in that way to link with the five senses idea. Classroom, totally different scenarios. The child might not get what the teacher's doing on the board, so I might just go along and write some sentence starters or give them some laminated prompt cards so they can access what's up on the board like everyone else.
And would you have to resource this yourself, or would someone else have to, or would you ask
Um,
the teacher and say, they won't be able to do this, can you tell me where I can get this from, or something along those lines?
yeah, I think it depends on the teacher, your relationship with the teacher. And I suppose, yeah, their level that they've planned that differentiation maybe. But like I say, sometimes the TA knows the student better and they might already have resources at hand that works for that child. I used to laminate a lot of things like cards to just keep on me to help different students in different classes. And I know a lot of teaching assistants do the same. So you've kind of got your own things on you. The teacher might have things too in that classroom. That's great. But it's nice to know you've got some things that you can help as you walk around different classrooms all day.
What sort of resources did you build up over your time, as a teaching assistant?
Yeah, a lot of, I suppose in the earlier job with the special needs, it was a lot of sensory things, like fiddle things and pictures, lots of picture prompts and things like that. And then later working in English, again, a lot of picture prompts, but for different things, I suppose, for literature text, the prompt cards for visuals, quote cards, help with punctuation and language techniques. Just yeah, I mean the laminator was my best friend. It still is doing tutoring, I suppose. It's just, you can create so many things, can't you? It's great. But yeah, things like that really, or little booklets, anything that would help go alongside what they were doing in class that would just make it a bit easier for them.
And what advice would you give to teaching assistants who are trying to build up a relationship with the teacher? Because obviously a teacher can be very overwhelmed. There's 30 potentially plus children in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
class. And in a way, they just hand the stuff over to you and be like, can you just do this? And sometimes they don't have time to explain it properly. So, like, really good teaching assistants I've worked with over the years, they've just taken, your activity as a starting point and they've just run with it because they've got those years of
Mm,
experience. But obviously, to make the relationship better for the child and the learning experience better for the child, it is good that you can have a positive relationship with the member of staff.
Oh
So what
yeah,
advice
definitely,
would you
yeah. Mm.
recommend building up like a good relationship? Or, when you first go in the classroom and you've never met the teacher before, what's a
Mm.
good way to approach the teacher?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a really good example you've given there, because what you said there as well, that's the dream. You want the dream team, but yeah, you've got to get to that point, haven't you? I think, yeah, you've got to, as a teaching assistant, you've got to be the one to make the effort first, maybe. Which, obviously the teacher should too, but like you just said, the teacher's got 30 children, and they're probably a little bit more overwhelmed at the beginning of the lesson than the TA is. So the TA, go up and talk to the teacher, say, hello, I'm here. What do you want me to do today? Just to initiate that, I think, to let them know that you're there and I'm here to do what you want. And then hopefully you will build up that relationship where they will get to know what the teacher wants from them. And like you say, they'll get that activity and they'll run off and they can do it their own way then. Because
Oh,
I have met teaching sometimes you do get that little I don't know how to describe it, where there's a bit of resentment there, where TAs don't feel valued. I've obviously seen it from that side, but then I do understand teachers do get overwhelmed as well. So TAs have sometimes said to me, like, oh, that teacher never speaks to me. But I think, did you speak to them? Did you go and say hello at the beginning of the lesson that, you're in their classroom with them for an hour? Yeah, just make the first move. Be friendly and approachable to the teacher and start to build up that relationship so you can work together for an hour
mm,
or longer, obviously, in a primary setting. You might have all day together, so you need to get on, don't you?
mm. The day is so busy, and like when I've worked in some schools, there have been people that come in and they just sit, and you
Mm,
can understand then the level of frustration from a TA, from a teacher, sorry,
yeah,
because
definitely. Yeah.
you need someone that's obviously, if they don't know the job, that they're learning, they're
Mm,
training,
yeah.
but you've got to have that initiative to think, right, look at the classroom around me, what can I see that potentially the teacher needs help with, without having to
Mm,
constantly go into him or her to ask about it. So you do
yeah.
have that. You can't just sit there and do nothing. Um, and then if the teacher
Mm,
sees that you're willing and you're engaging, and they'll be like, "Oh, sorry, could you do this? Could you do that?" Because obviously
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
their
Mm,
minds are so busy. But then also you can
yeah.
see, as the years are going on now, TAs are having much bigger roles and
Mm,
doing the roles as a teacher, and there is that level of frustration, and especially TAs that have been in the job years, and they get a new teacher, and you can understand their frustration as well, because they're
yeah,
like, I
definitely.
know
Yeah.
this job inside out, but there's also the awkwardness with pay. They're not being recognised for their work, so there's a whole
Yeah, it's
thing to
tricky.
do with that as well.
The thing I hated the most about the job was working in cover lessons, where the cover teacher
Uh,
would be in that day. They wouldn't know the school, they wouldn't know the class, and some of them would be good. Don't get me wrong, but quite a lot of the time that they wouldn't know what to do. They might not know the subject, they wouldn't know the kids. So I would end up taking over if they wanted me to, just because I knew the kids and I knew the subject. But then yeah, they're getting paid probably double what I am that hour, and it makes that hour really difficult. Behaviour is always worse in a cover lesson as well. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean that's no one's fault. That's just the situation it is. But yeah, TAs they're definitely are underpaid for what they do, and then things like that highlight it.
What differences did you notice between being a TA and a HLTA in reference to the interview process and the jobs themselves?
I think the interview process was very similar, apart from as well as the Senko and the um, head teacher. There was also the head of English on the panel, because obviously 'cause it was a subject specific role. I think the role did expect more in some ways because it was, yeah, subject specific, more responsibility on delivering English to groups and things like that. But then working in the special needs department was very challenging in other ways. So I suppose it's just that, I suppose because I went from a special needs unit to a secondary school, I didn't really get that comparison with a level two TA in a secondary school, if you know what I mean. It was a completely different kind of environment anyway.
So it's like whatever school you're in, then, isn't it? It depends on what the expectations
Mm.
are in whatever role and whatever school you go into.
Yeah, because I've not really done that level two TA role within a mainstream school. In fact, I
Right.
was a level one because I was a one-to-one. It was a level one role.
Oh.
So very little money, but I did love it because I loved working with that student. And the only reason I left was because my contract was tied to him, and he was going to be leaving in the next year, and this other job came up, and it was in my subject, and I thought, oh, I need to make the move while this opportunity is here. But I say I did love the job.
And let's talk about that then, because often a lot of TAs' roles are in line with how long a child needs them for. And sometimes TAs
Mm.
can think that they'll be staying on, but often that's not the case. So can you explain a little bit more about that, about contracts lined up with a child's needs?
Yeah, I think often a TA might have a 1 year contract if the school have extra funding funding tied to the child, isn't it? How many hours support that child might get. So they might need someone for a year. Quite often though, I often seen the TA will stay on because there's normally another child coming up. There's another reason that the school might need you for another year. So quite often they do stay on,
And how
obviously
do you
depending how they've
feel?
took to that role.
Oh, how do you feel once the child, you've moved on from that child? Do you find that hard or it's just part of the job?
Yeah, I was really sad to leave that job. I suppose it's different because I left before him, but I did stay in touch, like I say, and I still do now. And then in the secondary school, even in the mainstream, you're saying I used to work with the year 11s a lot, so that then they would leave every year. It's always very sad, isn't it, when a group go that you've worked with a lot.
Oh. So for someone that wants to be a teaching
Mm.
assistant in this current time, but
Mm.
doesn't have much experience of working with children, what would you recommend them to do first before applying for a teaching assistant job?
And I don't know what's allowed now, but say I did contact the local schools to ask to come in and observe. I don't know if schools have changed a lot, haven't they, since COVID and things, but I don't know, that might be worth looking at, or any kind of role or volunteer position with young children is good for experience as well. I mean, I worked at the local library for helping with their summer reading scheme
Oh,
while
there's
I
loads of
during
that
my
at the minute, yeah.
yeah, that was actually while I already had the job. But it was useful experience obviously for later on as well. And some schools have summer schools and things like that as well, where you can get extra experience. Yeah, so yeah, and anything that you can have with young people, really, it's all valuable, isn't it?
Definitely. And what general tips would you give to a new teaching assistant about to start their job, possibly in September?
I think it's like what you were just saying, being proactive. Yeah, show that you're willing to learn and do something all the time. Yeah, and yeah, I think being organised is quite an important one as well, because that's often a skill a lot of children need help with, helping them to organise. If you can keep yourself organised as well, and yeah, having that humour. I think smiling and having a laugh with the kids and the teachers goes a long way in a school.
You're
Yeah,
going
and
to be
just
quite a
yeah,
long day otherwise.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah.
Oh dear. Well, we're just about to come to our last question. So, what is your current role now that you're no longer a teaching assistant?
So now I'm a tutor. I've got my own little business, which I've actually been tutoring for over 10 years alongside these TA roles. But then now, last October half term, I left my current role to pursue this because I've got a young family, got a 1 year old and a 3 year old. So I wanted to work from home really. So I now teach online and in face to face, key stage 3 and key stage 4 English mainly. Yeah, now I'm really enjoying it.
That's lovely. And where can we find you online?
So Homes at Homes English Tuition. I've got a Facebook page and then there's a website link from the Facebook page as well. Yeah, come and have a look and give me a follow. That'd be great. Thank
Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing all your knowledge about
you.
the
Thanks
role
for
of a
having me.
teaching assistant. It's been lovely to chat
Thank
to
you.
you. Thank you very much for watching. And if you liked today's video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and see who else I'm chatting to.